What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV, aka Darth Apocalypse. All right, so let's get to this. So, Shaquille O'Neal is a very interesting case when it comes to his placement in history. There's no doubt about it that he is the most dominant big man in modern NBA history. Definitely the past 50 years. There's no question about it. And I think when you look at the fact that the last several years of his career, he was essentially a role player, so it sort of hurt his overall averages. But in his prime, I know for his career, it's about 23.7 points, and I think like 10 and a half rebounds per game, I think, something like that. But in his prime, Shaq was giving you 27 to 30 points a game, 11 to 13 rebounds a game, 2 to 3 blocks per game. And Shaq was such a dominant player that he changed how NBA teams were assembling their rosters to the point where teams had to have a plethora of big men, centers, and power forwards. You started seeing teams, you don't see it today in the NBA anymore because they're not really valuable today. These 270, 280, 290 pound, big men who today couldn't really make it in this fast paced league. But in the late 90s and 2000s, there was a lot of those guys being signed by teams because you needed that bulk to try to contain Shaq. You just needed literally the bodies for fouls. Your Bill Winningtons, your Luke Longleys, you needed those types of extra fouls, pretty much, because Shaq was going through centers like, goddamn Garfield through lasagna. But at the same time, we always felt like Shaq left a lot on the table. And although he won't come right out and say it, he knows it too. He left a lot on the table to the point where, and Kobe Bryant said this, if he had Kobe Bryant's drive, he would be the GOAT. He would have been the GOAT. But some people feel like he still should be in that conversation. And one of those persons is former NBA player turned podcaster Brendan Haywood. So I'm reading from an article from basketballnetwork.net. The article is titled, Brendan Haywood thinks Shaq is unjustly left out of the GOAT debate. You don't go past many names until you get to Shaquille. Shaquille O'Neal was one of the most dominant players in basketball, if not the most dominant. Listed at 7'1" and 325 pounds during his prime. O'Neal was bigger, faster, and stronger than the big man he went up against, and there was no way one player could defend him. O'Neal was often doubled or triple teamed, yet he still managed to score, and the only way you could stop him was to send him to the free throw line because he was a horrible foul shooter. But despite Shaq's exploits, accolades, and awards, he is often left out of the greatest of all time debate. Not that Shaq is the GOAT, but there are other big men listed higher than him in the all-time ranking. Former Washington Wizards center Brendan Haywood defended O'Neal standing among all-time greats. Wherever you want to put Shaq, I'm cool with it. If you want to put him top 5, top 10, if you want to put him in front of Kareem or behind Kareem, he deserves that space. And Shaq is always in those conversations. Some people might say, Listen, Hakeem beat him in the finals, so Hakeem is in front of him. You know, Hakeem has a different type of hardware. MVP and Defensive Player of the Year all in the same season. Not a lot of guys can say that, but when we talk about the pantheon of great elite big men, you don't go past many names until you get to Shaquille O'Neal. So look, I look at it like this. The reason why I think most people have a hard time putting Shaq in that GOAT conversation is number one, he suffers from something that Wilt Chamberlain suffered from. And that is when you're a big guy like that, a lot of times people say, and it's hypocritical and it's unfair. But some people think when you're big like that, that you should dominate. You don't get the credit you deserve. When you're a shooting guard, people look at it upon as a skill position, especially if you're on the smaller side. When you're a center and you dominate, people say, well, he's closer to the basket. He should have an easier time scoring. Or he's bigger and taller than everybody else. He should dominate, right? So you don't get the accolades that you deserve. And when you fail to win a championship, people say, well, look how big this guy is. Why can't he win? So it's thankless. And most big men suffer from that issue. One of the ones who kind of escaped it a bit was Kareem, and that was because Kareem, although he was 7'2" and taller than almost everybody else in the league, he was slight. He was only 225 when he first came in the league, and I think the heaviest he generally got was 250. Although he did toward the end of his career bulk up to 265, but he still didn't look menacing. You know what I'm saying? He kind of just filled out all over, but he was still, for the most part, for most of his career, he was considered like a smaller center. So he scored more with his agility and skill set. So he got his honorifics. But guys, bruisers like Shaq and Wilt, although Wilt did display skill set early on in his career, but you don't get the same props. Also, I think what hurt Shaq too is there's not an extended period of time in his career where you could say he was definitively the best player in the league. Like when he first came to the league in 1992, 93, the best player was Michael Jordan, right? Then he abruptly retired after that year. Then there was a chance for Shaq to move into that space. But then over the next couple of years, 93, 94, 94, 95, when the Rockets were winning back-to-back titles, generally speaking, most people said the best player became Akeem Olajuwon. Then Mike came back in 95, and then from 95 to 98, he generally regained that crown, right? The 3 straight championships. But when he retired for the last time as a Bull, although not the final time, it was over for grabs again. And then you can make an argument from 99 to 02 or 03, it was Shaq. But the bookends of that era are 2 Tim Duncan titles. 1999, which a lot of people like to discredit because it was a 50-game season. But then if you're going to do that, then we got to discredit that Miami Heat team that won in 2012 too, right? That's when people stopped talking about it. I find it interesting because I think a lot of Laker fans did that. A lot of Laker fans who had a rivalry to an extent with Duncan and the Spurs for like the best rivalry in the 2000s, best dynasty in the 2000s. I like to say, well, the 1999 championship didn't matter. The media said that too because they didn't like Tim Duncan. But I noticed they stopped saying that when Miami won in their 66-game schedule. But anyway, Shaq didn't really have an extended period of time where he was the definitive best player. Like I said, you could say from 2000 to 2002, but it's debatable. Because you could also say that Tim Duncan was right there. Tim Duncan did win back-to-back MVPs. And then afterwards, it was, you know, I would say Kobe, and then Kobe all the way up until the early 2000 teens. So that's why he's really not in that conversation. Also, I can't ever really say, even though he was very popular, Shaq, and he was amongst the highest selling jerseys. I think the year he went to Miami, he had the number one selling jersey in the NBA. So he was very popular with fans. But as far as him being the face of the league, you almost never have centers be face of the league. It just doesn't happen. Almost never happen. They're trying to make Victor Wembanyama the face, but you know, when Michael retired, they tried to make Vince Carter the face. And then they tried to make Kobe, but then he had his legal issues. So it was like kind of muffled for a while, although he was still stayed the people's champ. And then when he won the championship in the late 2000s, I think the league re-embraced him as the face of the league. So yeah, this is how I look at it, man. Then also, the way Shaq scores and him being a center, going back to my earlier point, most people can't really relate to being 7 feet tall and 300 pounds. Most people who play basketball, they relate to playing, I guess, more as a guard. Most people are around 5'10", 5'11". I'm talking about men, 5'9". So they relate more to the perimeter players. Now, me personally, when you look at him versus other players, I mean, you can't put him ahead of Kareem because his resume isn't as great as Kareem. Now, people who say that he's more dominant than Wilt, I have a hard time accepting that, and I don't really understand what you're talking about, because if you say, well, look, the NBA implemented Hacker Shaq. Well, the NBA was doing Hacker Wilt long before that, and even more aggressively, much more aggressively, if you really look at the history of it. Shaq never led the league in rebounding. Wilt led the league in rebounding 11 of his 14 years. Although they didn't officially track blocks when Wilt and Russ were playing, it's guesstimated that Wilt probably led the NBA in blocks probably 7 or 8 times. Maybe Russell sometimes, Nate Thurman sometimes. Shaq never led the league in blocks. Wilt has led the NBA in win shares numerous times. As a matter of fact, when you look at his per year average, he's the all-time leader in per year average win shares. I don't think Shaq ever led the league in win shares except for maybe once, if I'm not mistaken. I think once, maybe twice. That's it. Shaq has two scoring titles. Wilt had 7. I mean, really, the only thing that he has over Shaq are championships. And Wilt never played with a guy like Kobe or Wade in their primes. Wilt didn't have the benefit of free agency. Shaq has 4 career 50-point games versus Wilt's 118. Shaq never scored 50 in the playoffs. Wilt did it 4 times. But Wilt's the underachiever? So at the end of the day, and plus, when the center position was more competitive in the 90s, Shaq was losing a lot. Matter of fact, Shaq, I think, holds the NBA record for most sweep losses in playoff history. I believe he holds that record. I think Wilt got swept out of the playoff once. So I can't put Shaq ahead of Kareem or Wilt. And quite honestly, I don't know if I can put him ahead of Russell or resume-wise or even Moses Malone. That's why I used to have Shaq like in my bottom 10, but I'm really considering whether he should be in a top 10 list. Maybe he should be more top 15. I mean, is he seriously better than Moses? When you combine ABA and NBA, I believe he's a little bit behind Moses in points when you combine ABA and NBA. He's behind Moses in rebounding. He's behind Moses in MVPs. He is ahead of Moses in championships by a lot, and maybe that's the difference maker in some people. 4 championships to 1. But Moses did more with less. I don't think Shaq could go to an NBA Finals with that 1981 Rockets team that Moses went to. When I look at all the help that Shaq's had versus Moses for the entirety of their careers, I don't know. I got to go with Moses. That's just my opinion, at least, man. But tell me what you guys think.